Magandang araw, Podmates! Howie Severino muli na may guest ngayon na gustong buhayin muli ang Maynila bilang Pangulo ng advocacy group na Renacimiento Manila, si Ginoong Diego Torres. Impossible dream ba ang kanyang misyon? Magandang araw sa iyo, Diego Torres.
Magandang araw din po sa inyo lahat. Yaman po, Sir Howie.
Thank you for joining us, Diego. No? Renacimiento means renaissance, no, in Spanish, or rebirth, or sa Tagalog, muling pagsilang. Yung inyong Instagram account states that Renacimiento Manila aims to usher in a cultural rebirth in Manila, the Pearl of the Orient, Queen of the Pacific. Yung dati niyang branding sa ngayon, may mga gumagamit pa niyan, no? Now, both of us know Manila, Diego. No? You work there. I've lived there. So we and millions of others know what we suffer. No? It's not easy to live and work in Manila. No? But let's start with something positive for a change. So gusto kitang tanungin, Diego, no? What is there to like or even love about Manila?
Ano nga ba? No? What is it that we love or I love about the city of Manila? Well, basically, first and foremost, you have the history of the place. No? Especially if you're well-read or you know much about history. Today, there may be mundane, ordinary buildings and dyan, but there used to be significant places there. For example, if you're just passing through Loton, it's just a crossing of traffic, for example. And yet, if you know history, you can imagine it in the 1600s as the Chinatown area of Manila or the Parian, or if you walk to Binondo or Avenida, imagine the parades that went there. Another is the rich tapestry of architecture. So from historical events, you have your architecture of the place, meaning preserved in these buildings are the physical stories of a city, its cultural exchanges, its growth, the passion of men and women and everyone who were part of the development and progress of the city. And then, of course, there's the environmental beauty of the place. Of course, sometimes Manila, gray, we imagine it like that. But if you know where to look, you could see the Pasig River, for example, the parks, the trees, the avenues, and the walkways, lalo na sa Ermita. The Ermita area where you have some areas, the UN Avenue, for example, you still have patches of those areas with trees. No? And meron character.
Diego, no, people listening might be snickering a bit at your observation that Manila has environmental beauty. So baka may mga nagtatanong, saan ba itong environmental beauty ng Maynila? No, I mean, where do they go to see it specifically?
So specifically, in terms of to see that beauty of Manila, you have actually parts of Fort Santiago, for example. It's one of the greener areas ng Intramuros, no? And then you have the gardens actually around Intramuros. Because you have the walls, yes, but there are gardens there. The ASEAN Garden, for example, even the tree-lined pathways which surround the golf course, no? Actually, parang trees na yun na nakapaligid doon sa golf course sa Intramuros are like at secondary a frame, no, to the walls when you're passing by. But another area where you get to see that is the Pasig River. Taking the ferry going north, going east, no, for example, from Escolta, doon ma-realize na yung mga islands doon, the birds living in those areas like Isla de Provisor, doon sa Isla de Convalescencia. These are two islands near the Malacanang Palace compound. So you get to see yung greenery of those areas.
So, what made Manila distinctive, no? Bakit siya hinahangaan noon, no? Ngayon, you know, globally, siguro no one will say Manila is such a beautiful city. Pero noon, tinawag nga siyang Pearl of the Orient. Jose Rizal, who was very critical of a lot of things, no, would wax poetic about the Pasig River in particular and Manila, no? So, what made Manila special?
I think because for the most part in the Southeast Asian region, we already have population centers, no, by that time, important trading ports. However, Manila develops as a global trading port from the 1600s onwards. So it cements itself in terms of knowledge, lalo na doon sa Western counterparts or Europe, for example, that they get to know, yes, these goods, these Asian goods that are coming from them to the Americas or from the Americas towards Europe are coming from port city known as Manila, no, in the east. And then Manila develops as a entrepot, a mixture of influences. You have the Asian, you have the European aspect, and then of course you have the American, or more or less the Latin American, and then later the North American influences mixing in. So it's a cosmopolitan city. So not just the architecture, but in the food, for example, in the literature, everything. And gradually, as the world becomes more open to international tourism and international trade in the 19th century, Manila was already at one of the developed cities in terms of its ports, its facilities, its capacity of with taking in and welcoming actually tourists. So it was one of the main stops, no, going around Southeast Asia, going around the Asia Pacific region. Kaya nagkaroon siya ng parang place dun sa mata ng mundo. The American period, for example, you get the development further of the city. No? At that time, yes, Hong Kong was also developed, pero Manila had a longer history in terms of connection to the international world. And then you have other cities as well, Singapore, they're developing. Yun lang talagang World War II, no, cuts to the history or cut short the development of the city. But up until that point, no, from the architecture, the business opportunities, it was like a window to the West, no, for many of the Asian countries that surrounded it.
So what are your favorite parts of Manila, personally?
Well, of course, number one would be Intramuros. No, without Intramuros, I wouldn't be in love with Manila itself. No, because doon ako dinala ng father ko before and ng family ko actually before, and doon nagsimula yung interest ko sa history. So I like it the most because if you see that it's one place where you have those old stone buildings and the old churches, the character of the area, and when you have someone who could tell you history and bring it alive, no, it becomes very interesting. You imagine, for example, nandyan yung Jose Rizal, these walls used to look like this. So, nandun din yung to the stories of my family. Ganun na bigyan ng buhay yung Intramuros. Aside from Intramuros, yung isang gusto ko rin is yung Binondo area. No? Kasi dun, iba-iba rin yung character and flavor of the place. You have architecture and food as well. One of the friends of Venecimiento told us, si Dr. Fernando Shalcitano, yung talagang melting pot, yung element of cosmopolitan nature na Manila dun sa Binondo area.
So, as a child, no, you were told a lot of stories about Manila by your family, your older family members, no? So, anong kwento ng Maynila na tumatak sa'yo o hindi mo malilimutan?
Well, although yung family namin was living mostly near Manila, Pasay, Mandaluyong, work and life brought them to the city. So for example, to my grandmother, I was able to hear the stories about the pre-war city, how, for example, crossing the Pasig River to the Colgante Bridge, which was still around during her childhood, yung wooden bridge yun So it was a suspension bridge, one of the first in Asia. So looking down, kita mo ilugad, yung tubig ng Pasig River to the slats of the wood. And then the tranvias as they go around the city. And she also told me the stories about the Second World War or the hardships of being stuck in the city during the Second World War, the scarcity of resources and the destruction that you could see from afar. They were one of the lucky few kasi nakaalis sila from Pasay, lumipat sila a month before the fighting happened sa Sampaloc. So when the fighting did take place, liberated na yung Sampaloc. And then of course, through her, and stories naman father ko, yung Escolta kasi, Doon nag-meet yung aking grandfather at saka yung grandmother. Actually, katanawan sila sa bintana nung dalawang, nandun pa na buildings, yung Don Roman Santos Building at saka yung Regina Building. So natanaw ni Lolo si Lola mula sa kabilang side, and eventually pumunta si Lolo sa kabilang building and niyaya sa lunch si Lola, and yun yung maging start nila.
What were they doing in those buildings?
Well, they worked there. My grandfather was working with an advertising firm. He had graduated kasi during 1942 sa UP. Wala fine arts, wala pa namang distinct campus na time. Si Lola naman was a secretary for a congressman from Pangasinan. So she was working there, and then doon siya kasi minsan nagpapahangin sa may bintana. Hindi niya alam, nakikita pala siya ni Lolo mula doon sa kabilang building. Tapos eventually, parang pumunta si Lolo doon sa building, mayroon siyang sa bintana, pinuha niya attention ni Lolo sa pamagitan ng isang signage na may nakalagay yung number niya. And then afterwards, he went over to invite her to lunch. No? Yun yung kwento nila. Sa side ng father ko, kumbaga yung grandfather ko, grandmother, sa side niya. And I'm lucky enough to hear that story kasi buhay pa si Lola. So she's 94. So naalam ko na lahat ng mga kwento mula sa kanya. No?
Yeah. So Diego, one reason why I asked also, aside from being gossipy, is this happened in Escolta, no? In Escolta, of course, most people, most Filipinos now don't know the significance of Escolta, but before, during that time, it was like the commercial center of Manila, no? Wala pa yung Makati noon, Ayala, BGC was still parang science fiction pa noon, or if even people were even imagining it. But Escolta was the reality for people who wanted to shop. Panahon pa ni Rizal, no? That's where people went to buy, a lot of maybe luxury goods at that time, no? So ano yung significance ng Escolta, Diego?
Well, great significance of Escolta was its development as the primary commercial address of Manila. The Americans actually called it the main street. No? Kasi parang sa mga old towns ng America, the main street, which is basically yun nandun yung mga major establishments. And the development of the Escolta was spurred in part by actually the Pasig River because nandun yung ports. So it made easier yung selling na imported goods, and as well as locating your shops there, no? Kasi kung mayroon ka shop doon, it was close enough to the ports, so some of the businesses like the British, for example, and the French would locate themselves doon sa Calle Escolta. And since nandun yung commercial activities, the banks, the insurance companies would eventually also locate themselves nearby. Doon sa Juan Luna Street, which was just a stone's throw away from Escolta. And then, the other commercial establishments like yung mga theaters, yung mga movie houses, they would locate themselves doon naman sa Avenida. So connected silang lahat. And it is because of Escolta in Binondo that you have the downtown area of Manila. And doon sa Escolta, bebenta yung mga, for example, the first bicycles, you have the first showing na moving pictures, as well as yung mga first cars. So doon, the first ice cream parlor was located doon din sa Escolta. Ganun ka-important yung street na yon.
So nung panahon ni Rizal, pinupuntahan na yung Escolta for some of those things, no?
Yes.
Yeah, alam ko na uso yung bisikleta nung panahon ni Rizal, no? So we can imagine Rizal walking over to Escolta from his school in Intramuros and walking around like parang namamasyal as like a typical high school or college student now would do, no? So kailan ba yung heyday or golden age ng Escolta? How long was it like the center of commerce in Manila?
Well, actually, as you mentioned, sir, sila Rizal has witnessed it, and because during their time, the bridge, hindi pa dun yung bridge, kung nasan Jones Bridge, the bridge directly went to Escolta itself. And in Noli, makikita nyo kung gaano kakabisado yung lugar kasi he mentions, for example, yung mga buildings that used to be located there. So, by the time that Jose Rizal was writing in the 1880s, he was talking about Escolta, probably in his childhood, the 1870s. It was already an established address. So it started becoming an important place around the early 1800s, with the opening of the ports, so international trade, so you have people coming in. And then dire-diretso siya hanggang Second World War. Hindi naman automatically pinatay ng World War II yung business sa Escolta. But its days were numbered, no? From the Second World War up until the 1960s, meron pa rin namang mga new construction, business could still locate themselves in Escolta. However, with the development and opening of Makati, dun sa Ayala Avenue, yung Makati Central Business District, it provided our businesses, kumbaga, better area to build new offices kasi yun naman syempre limited yung space nila talaga sa Manila and masikip rin naman talaga because you're talking about streets, no, that are 300 years old. So they started
Yeah.
moving there.
So anong condition ngayon ng Escolta? What's happening there now? Because I know some of these old buildings are still there.
Well, to look at Escolta now, for example, from what it was, no, during the 50s, even the 1930s, tahimik actually yung Escolta. Parang wala ka makita ng activity that took place before. And many of the establishments, the primary establishments are gone. Wala na dun yung mga talagang mahalagang stores. Most of them have moved out. Ang pinaka-active lang na building doon sa area is yung First United Building because there's the presence of the artists there and due to the owners of the building, sila, the Silianteng family, are very supportive of rehabilitating the building and reusing it, no, for other purposes and their offices there. But aside from them, the rest of the strip, tahimik. And some buildings are endangered, like yung Capitol Theater, which since last year, no, has been in the center of a battle kasi gusto i-demolish yung entirety of the structure na based on the condition beforehand, because it was the work of a national artist, it was done by Juan Dapil. He was the one who designed the building. Kailangan i-preserve yung tower of the structure. Pero the developer, last year started demolishing the entire relic itself, the tower, in violation of agreement with the National Commission of Culture and the Arts. So apparently nag-appeal sila and then of course nag-uusap pa rin naman and ang gustong pagawin na NCCA is of course i-preserve nila, i-restore nila or ayusin yung sinira nila tapos gawin part pa rin ng building na itatayo nila, no? So yun yung pinaka mainit sa usapin na yun sa Escolta. Pero just a block away from Escolta, which we still consider part ng Escolta area, is yung El Hogar building. Binubulok actually yung building doon. Which is sad kasi dalawang katabi niyang building, restore. At yung isa na restore na, yung 1919 Cafe, yung sa former HSBC building, and yung First City Bank of New York building na restore to be they said it's going to be a hotel. So nakakalungkot na isa sa mga major buildings, which by the way is one of the first skyscrapers in Manila, ay nagde-decay na siya, no? So yun yung dalawang major buildings na binabantayan namin sa area ng Escolta. At saka to some extent yung Juan Luna side.
So what does it take to preserve and restore these old buildings versus just allowing them or watching them get demolished, no?
Yung great challenge, of course, on our part as advocate is first and foremost to educate people about the importance of the buildings. Kasi dahil parang maganda silang tingnan or parang matanda na sila, automatically parang sa mata ng mga tao, it's worth saving yung mga buildings na ito. Then, talagang pagiging mapagmatsyag, no? Parang vigilant in terms of developments in this structure. So yun yung isang ginagawa talaga namin through our networks. Kasi hindi lang kami Nacimiento Manila yung kumikilos. We have other partners such as the Heritage Collective, Manileños for Heritage, among others. We have that network of concerned individuals who report to us or we report to each other whenever there are developments. So these are also volunteers, advocates, passionate individuals who know the values of these places. And then once we monitor these developments, approaching the cultural agencies, no, about what's happening in order for it to be either studied or to be demolished, or if there's a demolition to stop sila yung mga agencies natin. So we could also talk to the developers kasi hindi necessarily ready makipag-usap yung mga owners sa mga advocates, for example, kahit pa wala naman initially talagang panggaan, no? Of course, sinasabi nga namin natin na hindi naman natin automatically kalaban ang mga developers. Because we have to remember, these buildings were also part of the process of development ng lungsod ng Maynila in the past 200 years. However, we want to preserve as much of the identity of the city as enshrined in these buildings na hindi siya mabura in the face of new construction. So, finding a balance, no? Yun yung mahalaga. And ready naman yung mga advocates makipag-usap to educate and inform itong mga developers if they're ready to listen as well.
Yeah, kasi a lot of money is at stake here, no? Developers, they're business people, right? So how would you convince them that preserving a building would be more lucrative for them than demolishing it and building a much higher building that where they could make much more money? Gaano kalaking challenge yun?
Ito yung gusto namin makita kahit sa field sa heritage advocacy, making heritage economically viable and attractive para sa mga developers. So for us, developing a framework and a plan in terms of heritage-based development, key areas of the city that you could develop, for example, na merong heritage character and culture and tourism. Of course, hindi mo naman siya ma-implement sa lahat ng parts ng city. May areas talaga that you have to give to the developers in order to balance nga yung development. But there are important areas like yung Quiapo, Escolta, but Intramuros, secured naman na niya yung sarili niya. Pero may iba pang areas, San Nicolas, for example, wherein a certain balance could be done. For example, where it's feasible to save the entirety of the structure, we must save the structure. Where it's possible to reuse the building, reuse the building. But if there are conditions, for example, based on surveys done as well by our cultural agencies na talagang kailangan magkaroon na either partial demolition of the buildings, doon pumapasok yung sabi na what do we save? And once we do it, how respectful can we be to the history or the character of the building? It's not ideal, for an advocate. But as an advocate, we also need to see, yung compromises without compromising the key philosophy and principle of what we're trying to do. So, kasi meron talaga realities na kailangan ibabalance siya, Although ipausapin, for example, kung mayroon ka mga condominiums na tinatayo, malapit, for example, sa mga simbahan, sa mga heritage zones, for example. Kasi yun yung mga zones na talagang tinalaga mo na, kumbaga, for protection. So, ibang usapin siya kung gray areas pa yung mga lugar na yun. Case-to-case basis siya, kumbaga. But yes, the importance of dialogue naman yun nasa heart,
One primary means of educating by your group are these heritage walks, that you also lead. How effective do you think those have been? Yung heritage walks ninyo?
The Heritage Walk started in 2021, primarily actually as part of the campaign regarding the Pasig River. So it was because it was the one thing that we can do, is to bring people to this area so they get to experience the places themselves and makita na ma-appreciate na yung place na yun. So may mga iba-iba kami mga targets for that. First and foremost is bringing people to these places, so getting a large number of people to those places. Secondly, to sustain a level of tourism activity in those places. Kumbaga, gagawin mo siyang facet and part ng buhay ng community na may tours na regular na umiikot sa mga lugar na yon. Parang laying the foundation na, those are tourists, And we've seen yung effect niya sa Quiapo, as well as of course, yung Binondo area. Intramuros, given na yun kasi Intramuros is a hub for tourists, so sanay na sila. But in the Quiapo area, for example, when we do our tours, for example, because as much as possible, every month kami may walks sa Quiapo. Kahit yung mga tanod doon, yung mga barangay officials, yung mga bahay, pag tumaran yung group, alam nila agad na, yan yung nagtutour dito sa Quiapo. So, hindi lang siya para sa outsiders, para rin siya doon sa locals. Tapos ikatlo, where possible talaga, we link up with local organizations and establishments. For example, in the Tondo Walk, we link up with Liberty Food Mart or yung bakery sa may Tondo na may stop doon. Tapos yung guests, sila? We encourage them, if they want, they could buy products from the bakery. The same with Quiapo, doon sa Bake Right Bakery, as well as Bahay Nakpil Bautista naman yung isang stop doon. So, Yun yung mga ginagawa naming ways by which slowly sinusubukan namin maramdaman din ng community. No? Na pag may tours, for example, may given ding gains sa kanila. These are just small steps at the moment. Pero yun yung mga ginagawa namin, at least for these areas like yung sa Quiapo, sa Tondo, San Nicolas, at saka sa Santa Ana. Yung ibang areas like Santa Cruz, for example, of course, sobrang dami ng tao doon. Kaya really does not make much of a dent pag dumadaan ka yung group noon. But in those communities na may malaking residential population pa, ramdam mo talaga yung from the people, makikita nila. Minsan nagkikwento rin sila mismo. Doon sa Quiapo yung pinakamaraming ganun eh. Mga bata na sasabihin nila, halimbawa doon sa may Pagoda House, yung Ocampo Pagoda Mansion, yung mga bata mismo yung mag-share na, nakita na namin yung loob niyan, ito yung tsura ng ganyan. Tapos sabihin rin nila na, ay sila kuya. So familiar para sa kanila na makita yung mga groups.
Diego, you've mentioned the Pasig River several times already. No, may pinaplano kasing Pasig River Expressway, no, an elevated highway over the Pasig that would enable motorists to travel from east to west, west to east, no, in Manila. Anong posibleng impact niyan from your point of view?
From what we've studied and with the help of other allies dun sa Ilog Pasiglahin formation, sa loose network and alliance of groups, yung ilang major na effects niya, first and foremost, yung possible structural effect niya, doon sa structures located along the Pasig River. Isang mahalagang building na nandun sa ruta is first and foremost, Fort Santiago. No, yung Fort Santiago kasi will be located dun sa on and off ramp sa may R10. And based sa kanilang design, no, kasi meron siya yung pababa, maghahag yun near the walls ng Intramuros, thus threatening the stability of the building. We have to remember that the foundation of that fort was laid down in the 1580s, 1590s period. So any drilling, any boring, any pile driving, paggawa ng mga caissons in those areas would have an impact to sa building. It's already suffering from yung flooding due to mga high tides more recent years. Pero yun yung ano pa yung pwede maging damage once meron ka ng ginawa doon. Not to mention, as you move eastward from Fort Santiago, meron ka dyan yung mga bridges na kailangan i-clear nung tulay. For example, yung Binondo Intramuros Bridge, one of the newest bridge in the river. Ang taas ng arch nun, yung tulay na yun. So, saan mo ipoposition yung bridge? No? Saan mo siya ilalagay malapit? Kasi kung gusto mo siya ilagay sa part ng bridge na kung saan wala yung arch, malapit yun sa Aduana Building, na a structure from the 1820s naman, located on reclaimed land from the river. And then as you move eastward, you have Jones Bridge, Post Office Building, kung sa kabila side mo siya itatayo, yung Calvo Building, Mahina Building. So ang dami dun sa part na yun ng Manila. So that's one structural effect. Next is yung effect niya dun sa vista or the character of the place. Minsan kasi we take that for granted. No? Most people na parang, okay lang yan. Ano ngayon kung may parang structure dyan. Vistas are still important. Actually, they are part of the character of a place. And if you put an expressway on top of the Pasig River, haharangan niya yung vista na yun. It will disturb the entire vista of the river. Like yung post office building, yung Metropolitan, yung theater, Quezon Bridge, as it goes all the way east. No? Not to mention, tatayo mo siya sa area na may mga sa Makati, Mandaluyong area, may mga high-rise na doon and condominiums na mga bago. Tapos may expressway na dumadaan doon sa by ilog, no? So, malaki yung affected sa vista of the place. And this is a vista that has been experienced by people like Jose Rizal and everyone in the past. The character of the environment, the land on the side may have changed, but it is the same vista, no, na nakikita na. To put expressway on top of that is to disturb that and deny that character of the place for the next generations. And of course, nandun yung environmental factors, like if you put a bridge over that area, yung emissions that it will create. So we're talking both noise as well as yung carbon dioxide o yung mga bubuga ng mga sasakyan. Not to mention yung possibility ng damage caused by the structure in the event of forces that we do not have power over with. Like for example, yung mga earthquakes, no? Kasi it is a river, no? And although we may have some confidence in our technology, we must never ever belittle the power of nature. Kasi yun yung story na lungsod ng Maynila simula ang mga tao magtayo sa Maynila, no? Yung adjusting and adapting to natural forces. Hence, once we have the bahay na bato, for example, it's an adaptation against earthquakes, as well as other materials that we try to build with, no? So, parang meron tayong kung ano na confidence sila in developers. If we build the bridge there, hindi yan masisira sa earthquake. Walang earthquake proof na long term na mga buildings. There's always some sort of damage that we have to equate. And if you have a bridge that spans over other bridges na cross the river, it has the potential of cutting those, the north and south access to the metropolis. So yun lang ilan sa mga aspects na magiging effect. Not to mention sa navigation. So sometimes nasabi nila, kung dinidredge naman natin yung Pasig River, so magagamit pa rin siya for the ferry or shipping. Kasi marami pa rin ships na dumadaan. But we have to remember that if you start building structures on the river, it will start affecting yung mismong flow ng river. Meaning, hindi naman siya backflow anything. Pero if you're a boat, no? Kasi may kita mo kahit yung ferry, iniiwasan niya talaga kung nasaan ngayon dumadaan yung San Juan, yung connector, yung Skyway connector na pumapatong sa ibabaw ng San Juan River or where there are bridges, talaga may iniiwasan sila. And sand and soil builds up. Kung nasaan may mga pylons, kung saan may mga solid na pwedeng kapitan, nagkakaroon niya ng mga lupa. So, in the long run, if you build on the river, magiging untenable siya unless tuloy-tuloy mo siyang itedredge, which is unsustainable. Kumbaga kapag lagi mo siya, kailangan itedredge mo siya para lang maging navigable siya for the ferry.
Mm-hmm. So aside from your group, no, marami pang ibang group na nag-advocate for heritage and heritage preservation. So may mga victories recently. What kind of positive results have already been achieved by the heritage movement?
Right before the pandemic, meron naman mga attempts by the heritage groups to preserve, declare some of the structures in Manila, for example. And recently, with the help ng mga local groups sa Quiapo, mayroong pinupush na bill, na legislation, to declare yung area ng Quiapo centered around the church, Plaza Miranda, Calle Hidalgo, Calle Bilibid Viejo, that area. May bill by Congressman Joel Chua, 3rd District of Manila, na i-declare yon as a heritage zone. No? It's a big movement, so just one of those who are moving for that. Yung isa pang major na for us, no, is a win, is yung pagkakaroon ngayon ng mga proliferation unti-unti ng mga networks and youth na involved dito sa mga heritage advocacies. Na before kasi parang nakikita mo lang siya as a realm for experts or those who are educated well enough in the field. Pero based on inquiries on our side and yung mga nakakatrabaho namin, may mga new faces, no, in the heritage field and marami mga interested din naman. Just need to take the time, no, to educate people regarding dun sa importance, kumbaga, no, what they could do first and foremost, no. So yun yung ilan. Siyempre may mga challenges, but so far yun yung wins, no? And with the help of pressure from individuals and with the government slowly seeing yung merit ng tourism, for example, in 2019, refurbishing Jones Bridge, meron yung mga pagkasaayos ng mga landmarks. Yung City Hall itself now has its own museum, yung Clock Tower Museum, within the revitalized Clock Tower of the Manila City Hall. And those are small victories, but there are ways, no, by which we could move forward in promoting the heritage of Manila.
Yeah, recently I watched a show at the Metropolitan Theater. Na for the longest time, nadadaanan ko yan na it was boarded up. Parang talagang it was in a really bad state of decline, no? And then at the show, parang sobrang na impress ako doon sa kanyang restoration. It was refurbished. Ang ganda, it was comfortable, ang ganda ng acoustics. It's a classic design, no? And it's been preserved.
So, yes, no? Yun yung kinatatakot lahat na parang siya. Noon, abandoned na and iniwasan siya talaga before the landmark. And here it is now, reborn as once again, no, taking its place as the Grand Dame of Manila as a site for theaters. And nakakaliw din naman na dahil nga inaayos pa ngayon yung Cultural Center of the Philippines, it's also being refurbished yung nandun sa CCP. Maraming sa mga performances na dati doon ginagawa, dito naman ginagawa sa may Metropolitan Theater. And sa mga ibang tours namin, yung Loton Arroceros tour, pinapasok actually din namin yun. And yung expression actually ng mga tao ay priceless once pinapunta mo na sila doon sa theater. Because yung awe, seeing that kind of space and architecture, yun yung makikita mo na if we could do this, no, for some of the areas of Manila na rich in heritage, like Escolta, for example, yung Hidalgo and parts of San Nicolas. Imagine yung foot traffic that it would bring and the experiences that it could provide. Hindi lang yung foreigners, no? Of course, the foreign visitors are important. However, you have to always remember yung ating mga mamamayan because sila yung unang-unang dapat pakinabang dun sa mga heritage treasures na ito.
Meron kayong Digital Manila project, no? In a nutshell, ano yun?
The Digital Manila project started in 2020, primarily by one of our members, Jayon. She's based in General Santos. She's one of the earliest members. And what we try to do with that is use yung modern technology, 3D modeling ng mga buildings, in order to do two kinds of digital models. One is to give people a glimpse of the possibility for modern day Manila. We call that the vision model. No? Basically, gumawa kami nito for Intramuros na, for example, kung may tranvia ulit sa Intramuros, or kung, for example, nandiyan yung Santo Domingo Church where it used to stand, or nandiyan yung former compound ng UST, ano yung nito area na ito. And kung pedestrianize, for example, itong parts na ito na Intramuros. And then, yung aming continuously na ginagawa ngayon is the pre-war or the Commonwealth period Manila. No? So what we do is based on research, photographs, and all of these things. No? And partly, last year, we were able to have funding from the NCCA to mount an exhibit, and which allowed a large part of the Escolta area to be completed. We're trying to recreate the cityscape of pre-war Manila. No? And out of this model, we wish to have mga 3D renders, both videos and photographs, and we're trying to study paano siya pwede maging accessible to the public, na pwede mong i-explore yung model itself, to explore digitally yung mga plaza ng Manila before, paano lakarin yung Manila, no? But for now, kinatapos namin yung model. And once we're done with that, balak rin namin gumawa ng paatras naman, no? Ibang time periods. For example, Manila in the 1700s, based on the Antonio Rojas map, and what we could find pa na material para makita ng mga tao, kasi we already have these pictures, we already have blueprints, may mamin naman tayo nito materials, to give them, to breathe new life, no, to these materials in the form of this digital model. Lagi namin sinasabi nga, we're not replacing old photographs, we're not replacing videos of the old Manila. Actually, we're using them, augmenting the experience by showing people. Siyempre, this is a generation na sanay sa mga video games, sanay sa mga 3D na mga models, showing them cities past in a different light.
So, accessible ba itong digital models ng Manila online?
We release it as renders or videos. We post it in our page. The model itself ay nasa amin pa lang siya because we're in the process of creating a version of that na pwede nilang maikot, ma-explore. Hampered pa kami, of course, no aming mga technological and financial restrictions in terms of developing it further.
Okay. Ang Manila used to have streetcars, no, called the tranvia. And then nawala sila nung gera, but they operated since the 1880s all the way until the 1940s, no? Gusto niyo bang ibalik 'yon?
Well, partly actually, yes. No? Pero of course, we know yung limitations currently na streets ng Manila in terms of taking additional traffic without removing some existing flow ng traffic. Kasi yung isang advocacy side ng Manila, kaya we package ourselves most as a cultural organization. Kasi meron rin kami side that promotes mass transit. No? Hence, for example, we have mass transit tours wherein we use the LRT as well as the other areas, and for example, the Pasig River Ferry, to visit places in Manila. So in terms of the tranvia, may potential kasi to bring it back in stages, no? Kasi yung tranvia to be completely a tranvia in a classic sense, kailangan ka may relays. So rail-based siya because it's a rail-based transit, or meron kayong catenary. Kasi yung may mga yung may mga electric poles niyan system. So meron naman trolley buses, trolley trams kung tawagin, na nagkukumuha ng kuryente mula sa cables pero walang relays. So yun yung ilang mga possible options. Actually, nag-aaralan siya ng ibang members namin. So saan siya pwedeng gawin? They could function as feeder lines, no? Kasi currently you have the LRT serving yung main north-south na axis. And interestingly, yung sinaserve ng LRT was once served by the tranvia, no? Dumadaan sa Avenida yung tranvia noon eh. Tapos meron din sa ruta sa San Marcelino, although nasa Taft Avenue of course yung LRT currently, but it's serving that. So the tram could serve certain areas na as feeder lines, no? Of course, ang magiging problem with that is yung traffic currently sa kalye. Well, as it operated before, hindi naman siya exclusive na kanya lang yung daan na yun. No? It shares the road with other vehicles. But of course, if you have that, that's traffic sa Manila. No?
Well, Diego, I want to point out, no, kasi many of our listeners have traveled overseas, and you see streetcars, no, in major cities, San Francisco, you have them in Paris. So, manage naman. So, it's possible. Kahit sinasabi mong limited yung space yung sa Maynila at saka maraming ibang vehicles, nagagawa naman sa ibang lungsod eh.
When we post about it before, like may makita comments, for example, na paano yung binabahay Manila, so yung tranvia ay titigil. Well, ang reply nga namin doon, kahit naman ang bus at saka jeep tumitigil kapag bumabaha talaga ng malalim na malalim. Kumbaga, any vehicle, even the PNR, stops kapag masyado mataas ang flooding. So, possible naman siyang gawin. Kailangan lang ng will. And based on a more recent study by the city government ng Manila, they actually planned before, no? I'm not sure kung magkakeme over siya to this administration, to have may parang tram sa Rojas Boulevard from near Intramuros going to the south sa may Pasay area. Pero may potential kasi kung meron kang tram system connecting Intramuros, for example, to Binondo, to other parts of Manila, of the city, para gawing mo hub yung Intramuros kasi you have people there coming in, and isang problem na Intramuros is yung connectivity niya sa labas ng pader na Intramuros. But the tranvia is one thing na kayang dumaan sa loob ng Intramuros and connect it to, for example, Central Station, Binondo, Balate, Ermita. So yun yung mga may potential sa kanya. Kailangan pa lang siyang pag-aralan pa. Pero yes, as mentioned, sir, kasama rin naman siya sa aming mga advocacy plans.
How do you want to see Manila 10 years from now?
Well, vaguely speaking, so for us, yung parang philosophy behind it is in terms of what we wish to achieve, a progressive and livable city. Meaning, hindi naman tayo tutol sa progress. In fact, we want progress. However, we want that progress to have a respect for the identity and the past of the city. So in terms of physical, ano yung mga nais namin makita? Well, of course, better pedestrian pathways, some areas that could be pedestrianized. And interestingly, ginagawa siya sa Intramuros currently. There are parts of Intramuros na pinapedestrianize na, like yung General Luna, Plaza Santo Tomas. They are undergoing construction there. Na taon, may ganung naging proposal, no? Pero yun, pedestrianize certain areas like Intramuros. More connectivity between Intramuros and its other areas. And one reason for that is yung foot traffic in terms of making heritage areas accessible. Kaya mas magiging madali for Filipinos, tourists, both local and foreign alike, na pupuntahan itong Binondo, yung area ng church, yung Plaza Calderon de la Barca, o pumunta dun sa may Santa Cruz area, pumunta sa Quiapo. So connectivity, better pedestrian infrastructure, cleanliness man lang, in terms of yung maintenance ng mga plazas. Siguro at least within 10 years, maayos na nila yung Plaza Loton, kasi yun na lang actually naiiwan na light dun sa area around City Hall. Yung ayos nila yung Cartilla Park, naayos nila yung Hidden Garden kung tawagin, pero it stopped short dun sa Loton because laki no area and dami kailangan
Mm.
i-relocate ng mga tao. And perhaps more museums are dedicated sa other aspects ng Manila, like the military history of the city, fashion in the city, development of fashion, for example, in the city, architectural history of the city, among other things. And yung iba doon, of course, we're actively working to achieve. Yung iba naman, hopefully, with collaboration with other groups and with the local government and national agencies, we'll be able to achieve.
Sarap isipin lahat yan. Sana maraming makinig sa'yo na decision makers lalo na. Maraming salamat Diego Torres, Pangulo ng Renacimiento Manila, yung Heritage Advocacy Group. Salamat sa iyong mga pangarap at sa iyong pagsusumikap para sa lungsod na Maynila. Mabuhay ka.
Maraming salamat din po at magandang gabi po.
Hi, I'm Howie Severino. Check out the Howie Severino Podcast, an original for GMA News and Public Affairs. New episodes will stream every Thursday. Listen for free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and other platforms.